Okay, so I've got 47 slides to give in 45 minutes, so some of these slides are not going to appear. So if I feel a little unconfident, like someone's going to ask me an awkward question, that's when I'll start skipping slides. So, human beings, that's like most of us here, have been creating virtual worlds for 40 years. I may have had something to do with that because I co-wrote the first one, Mud, which only I remember. But these, although they are games, they aren't merely games. They're not even merely worlds. These are, in the modern equivalent would be World of Warcraft, modern as in 2004, World of Warcraft, Second Life, those are the poster children. But they're not even worlds. What they are realities. They're self-contained spaces of existence, so the things in them exist relative to that space, and they're governed by a prescriptive set of rules which we call the physics. Those who control the physics of a reality are the gods of that reality. This means that I am a god, which is great because I love being a god. It's fantastic. Because it doesn't mean that being a god of a reality that we have created for a game means I'm the god of this reality. Although, of course, it doesn't mean I'm not either. Now, I'll be calling the objective reality that we live in reality in these slides. It gets its own special font, which I'm going to have difficulty pronouncing. Virtual worlds are sub-realities of reality. So there's the objective reality we live in, which is reality, and we've created some sub-realities which are to do with us. They're consequent on reality. Now, at present, the realities we have created aren't particularly sophisticated, a couple of hundred people to make them, but most glaringly, the non-player characters, NPCs, that we populate these realities with are not remotely intelligent. I could say something sarcastic about the players, but never mind. But what if they were intelligent, as smart as us, or smarter? What if they were also conscious, self-aware, and able to think? In other words, what if they are sapient? Homo sapiens, sapient. Creating sapience is the end goal of AI. It's like with physics. Once you've figured out the physics of the universe, well, that's done physics. You can shut physics down and go home. With AI, once you've created something that's as smart as us or cleverer than us, well, that's it. You've done your job. You can go off and study something else instead. So we're aiming in AI to get something which is artificially intelligent, smart as us or smarter than us, conscious, able to think, whatever. Now, we're some way off having non-player characters with the same or superior reasoning and reflective powers as us. Quite a long way off, in fact. But time is on our side. How long do you think it would be before we got computer-created characters that were as smart as us? Would 100 years be enough? Or would you prefer 100,000? Or 100 million? Or 100,000 million? Or 100 billion if you want to speak American billions. The heat death of the universe is 1 followed by 100 zeros years away. So you've got quite a bit of time here, actually. You want planet-sized computers? You can have planet-sized computers. Yeah, 50 million years from now, planet-sized computers, everyone will have one in their pocket. You can take as long as you like. So, we've got all of the future. Let's assume that we will be able to create realities that are embodied digitally somehow in computers or whatever we call them in the future, and are populated by smarter as us or smarter non-player characters. Now, my aim in this talk, which is not quite as technical as some of the other talks that you've had, like any of them, is to point out some unusual moral and ethical questions that face the specialists of AI in the future. These are not questions that we have necessarily had to ask ever before. I'm only going to be considering sapient beings with no presence in reality, so the only connection they have with reality is that we implement their reality as a subset of our reality. So I'm not having them appearing in our world. The evil robot overlords are not today's topic. Today's topic is, whoa, we don't know about those evil overlords. We'll just keep these little AI guys in their own little universe. They don't even know we exist necessarily. And we'll let rip, let them live there. Now, as humans, we are moral beings. We each operate under our own personal system of morality. We've all got a sense of what's right and wrong. Doesn't mean we follow it, it's just that we operate under it. We know what's right and what's wrong. So the first question we ought to ask is whether the characters we create, these sapient non-player characters, are morally considerable. That is, does our system of ethics, our own personal morality, apply to them? Argument for, well, these are free-thinking individuals. Of course they're morally considerable. Of course we should treat them. They think they're just like us. The argument against is, well, they're just bits in a database. I don't care about bits in the database. I delete bits in the database every time I try and send an email. Now, for most of us, all moral beings are morally considerable. So if something is itself a moral being, we will consider it to be morally considerable. So something that has morals, we will think, well, if it's got morals, then it's worth us applying our morals to it. That doesn't mean the reverse applies. Some things are morally considerable but don't have morals. For example, babies, they're not really developed enough to have developed their own set of morals, but we nevertheless consider them as being morally considerable. They are things to which our morals should apply. Now, if non-player characters have developed enough that they have their own sense of morals, then we ourselves would be amoral not to regard them as being morally considerable. So in this talk, I'm going to take the view that our self-aware non-player characters of the future are moral beings. They've got their own set of morals. Therefore, from our perspective, they're morally considerable. We should apply our morals to the non-player characters. If you disagree at this point, well, the rest of the talk's going to be a bit rough, but I'll get back to you later. Right, so, difference between moral and ethics. A shared set of agreed-upon morals, usually for professional reasons, is called an ethical system. The difference best stated by Cynthia Payne, who was a woman. She was cause célèbre in the 1980s. She kept a disorderly house, which is to say a brothel. The brothel was quite a high-end brothel. It was frequented by members of parliament, lawyers, company directors, vicars, and at least one peer of the realm. And when she was asked, why would you name any of these people who come? They're all really famous. We all want to know who they are. She said, well, my morals is low, but my ethics is high. So yeah, she had low morals because she ran a brothel, but she was professional about it. She wasn't going to give away the names of her clients. We will need an appropriate ethical system in place before we start making sapient non-player characters. So, let's start with an easy question. Let's say we have created a reality populated by morally considerable non-player characters. This is assuming it's ethical to do so, and there are arguments that it isn't actually ethical to create them in the first place, but I'm not going to go into those. Is it ethical to switch off this reality? It's running on a computer, lots of non-player characters in there, all of them are subject to our ethics. Is it okay to switch off the computer that they're running on? There could be 10 billion non-player characters in that reality, and you just kill them all. Oops. All of them gone. Poof. So you would effectively, just by switching off their reality, have killed 10 billion sapient creatures. It would have been painless, they wouldn't know it happened. But if you told them in advance, oh, by the way, sorry, I'm going to switch your reality off, they'd be quite cross. Now, does the fact that they only exist because we created them in the first place mean that we have the right to kill them? Look, you guys have had a good life, but you wouldn't even have any life at all if we hadn't made this virtual world for you to live in. If we haven't created your reality, you wouldn't even exist. So because we created you, well, what we create we can also destroy. Well, we don't actually apply that argument to children, even though they often only exist because of us and other things. But then again, we do breed beef cattle specifically to kill it. And if we didn't breed it, it wouldn't exist. This is the meat is murder, veganism is genocide argument. Kill off all the beef cattle by not ever breeding them. But let's say we do feel bad about switching off the world, but our planet-sized computer is just too expensive for us to run. Would an acceptable solution be to take a snapshot, just to dump the state of the reality before we switched it off? So you've got this reality, we just dump it all into a big file, moon-sized file. Then we could safely power down the computer, and then later on, once our finances had improved, we could power it up again and reload it from the saved file. Non-player characters wouldn't know it had happened, it'd be seamless to them. It would just, their reality would appear continuous. So that sounds like it might be okay, yeah. But what if our finances didn't improve? The reality would never emerge from status. People would say, oh God, that old moon there, just dust that off, oh blimey, what was on that? And then they load it up and whoo, got a world. So if you never take it out of stasis, it's pretty much the same as destroying it, isn't it? What if we later became insanely rich? I realise this is a bit of a joke for AI researchers, but still, we could buy multiple computers and reload the file multiple times. So this is the world up to this point, no, and then we reboot it, and then we reboot it on 5 computers. Each one of those forked realities would create a new independent timeline. Is that ethical? Is that good that we now created so there's 5 copies of the same person suddenly forked and none of them are aware of the others? They all think that their reality is a seamless continuation of when we dumped it. What if later we merged a couple of realities together? We can only afford 4 really, let's bunch a couple of these together. We actually merged servers already in MMOs, so it's not unfeasible. That would contain 2 copies of people. So both of them would think that they were the real copy, but no, one of them isn't. Or maybe they both are. Maybe neither of them are. Would it be actually right to do that? Or would it be much worse? We just keep one and power down the other one, doesn't really matter because we've still got another 4 copies of what might have happened if we had let them run. What if we decided to merge them by deleting them? We've still got, you're still alive, there's still 4 of you alive, but we just killed off one of you and all the children that you might have had in that reality. What if the reality is deterministic? Would that make a difference? So you've got the same file, you boot it up, all the random number generators using the same seed, so you've got 5 identical realities. If you switch one of those off, have you killed the person? Because they're identical in another 4 realities. Are we allowed to do that? I'm not asking these questions expecting them to be answered, but they do need to be answered before we start doing this kind of thing. What if we periodically save the state of the one reality we have, because, you know, bugs and things, and if something happens that we don't like, then we say, oh, let's reboot that. Well, we'll find out what happens every Brexit, won't we? So what happens is something happens and you go, this has gone a bit all handmaiden's tale, let's reboot it and make maybe an adjustment so it doesn't happen again and carry on. The non-player characters will be unaware of what's happened because from then it's just a continuous carrying on. The non-player characters who were born after you did the save and between the save and the reboot would cease to exist. Well, never have existed in the first place. Now these are easy questions to ask because we can do all of this already. It's just that we don't do it for sapient non-player characters. Our non-player characters are pretty dim. But they're hard to answer because nothing like this has stressed our morals before. We can't look back at ancient Judaic texts and say, aha, it says in here that what you do when you create your own reality. No, they didn't do that back then. Now, I won't be trying to answer them here, but we do need them answered because who knows, maybe there'll be a breakthrough in AI and electronic engineering and these realities are 10 years away rather than 100 or more years away. We do actually need to have answers for these. Now, sapient can think, sentient can feel. Most sapient beings can think and feel, but some things can feel but not think. There are a small number of humans who treat no one as themselves but moral beings. These are psychopaths. But almost every human being will treat anything that's sapient as morally considerable. But that's now, back in the time of slavery, they didn't do that. They thought that people who were slaves didn't have the same kind of moral consideration due to them as people who weren't slaves. Most people will also treat sentient beings that aren't sapient, things like dogs, as being morally considerable, but they'll also accept that dogs themselves aren't moral beings. Dogs don't have a sense of morals, they only have what you've trained into them. Now, people can relate to suffering. If you kill a monkey's baby in front of it, it's not indifferent, isn't, oh, well, I'll just get another. It actually can be a bit upset. And if you tie a firecracker to a cat's tail, that's not the same as attaching it to a fence. So we've got these sentient but not sapient beings, but are they less important than sapient beings? So generally, you've got to say, do I save the dog or do I save the toddler? Dog or toddler? Well, it's my dog and I don't like the toddler. Most people would save the toddler because they have this hierarchy of moral consideration where toddlers, even though they themselves are not fully developed people, are probably better to be saved because they've got at least the potential for sapience than dogs which never will be sapient. So let's say we created a reality and there are sapient beings in that reality. Are they less important than sentient beings in our reality? So do you save the real dog or do you save the Mother Teresa in the game world, non-player character? That's a sapient, think like you person, but it's not in your reality. I mean, are you my reality is the best, and I'd save the beetle rather than save those 10 million people because they don't really exist. And how are you going to manage that? Is there a hierarchy of realities where the importance of sapience and sentience match? Now, what if your reality's got some creatures in it which are sentient, so they can feel, but they're not sapient? Should it trouble you if they suffer? Well, that's actually the wrong question. The right question is, should we implement suffering? Because we're gods, and if suffering exists in a reality that you created, it's there because you want it there, or you couldn't be asked to debug it. Why would you implement suffering in a reality that you have created? Well, in a word, verisimilitude. Other words, sadism, but even that depends on verisimilitude, because you've got to be able to feel that the creature you've created is somehow real in order to get fun from tormenting it. You would make the moral beings you create be subject to suffering because that's how reality works. So people suffer in reality, you're creating a virtual world, you've got creatures in the virtual world, you will make them suffer because people suffer in reality. But why would you want to create a reality that works like our reality? Well, because then you can more easily observe it and possibly visit it. you can't go to something if it makes no sense to you, so you want it to be something that will make sense to you. Your brain has evolved through millions, perhaps another 100 million years after this, of exposure to reality. Therefore, it's pretty good at interpreting reality, so if you create a virtual world, you will want it to be like reality so that you can make sense of it a lot easier than if it's you have to run programs to extract data from it. Now, this leads to an important question. Why would you create a reality in the first place? There are 8 reasons which I will list on the following slides, although I'm not actually going to read them out. I'll just tell you what the headlines are, because I'm running out of time, let's say. Each of these 8 reasons can be applied to 4 different beneficiaries. They can be applied to you, so I'm creating it for me, or I'm creating it for other humans, my fellow players, or I might be creating the virtual world for the benefit of the non-player characters who will populate it, or I might be creating it for higher powers who I believe operate on this world. But I won't be covering that last one, because I don't want to get into fight. Note that a motivation to create a world isn't the same as a motivation to keep it running once you've created it. So why would you create a virtual world for yourself? These are the 8 reasons. I got these reasons by essentially asking people and reading what other people have put who have created worlds as to why they've created them. People in our reality. And this is reasons, people with, some of them making artistic points, some of them are trying to teach themselves how to code, some of them are trying to use it as some kind of way of teaching themselves something, or teaching other people things. So this is it, and the main one at the bottom there for money. Why would you create a virtual world for other people? Because you're generous, you want other people to have fun, you want your players to make money. This is what they do with Second Life. You might want it as a satire on reality. You might want to be simulating some aspect of reality. So there's all these different things here. Devine, this is where you're creating the world specifically to be a god for your players. It's not players, for your non-player characters. So I am creating a world because I want to be glorified by the people who I put into that world. That's actually Christianity. So your non-player characters can improve themselves, to reward the best non-player characters, to teach your non-player characters things. The rewarding one, that's like ancient Egypt. To give the gift of life to your non-player characters, that's ancient Greece. So your non-player characters can worship you and so achieve a sense of purpose, that's Islam. So your NPCs can serve you, that's the Mongolian gods. But basically, there are reasons for all of these. And these are just, obviously, just one-liner explanations. There is the final one, which is where you might create a world for some higher power. For example, Ancestor simulation. You might be creating a virtual world in order to place your dead ancestors in it so they can live on beyond this world. But I'm not going to go through all the reasons here because, although I'm quite up for religious arguments, I don't actually want to do one inadvertently. But basically, people might create a reality for reason to do with how they believe reality that we live in came into being. The 8 motivations still apply, but I'll let you figure it out, or you can email me if you want to know what the mappings are. So anyway, these motivations pair up. So essentially, you've got realities as products. So you're creating a reality to prototype something or to profit, whether it's you prototyping or profiting, or the players, or the NPCs, or some higher power. Realities as tools, realities as destinations, realities as communication. The products ones objectifies the players and the contents. The realities as tools is objectifying the players, but it's subjectifying the content. So it's about the content, and the players are just people who will be going for the content. The content's the important part. Realities as destinations subjectifies the players, so it's all about the players, the player experience, but it objectifies the content. The content is merely there in the service of the players. And then you've got realities of communication, which subjectifies both players and contents. Because I know you expect a graph, here's a graph. You can actually do another dimension, depending whether it's input or output, but It's hard enough drawing these two-dimensional ones, and in experience, these are the ones that seem to capture people's imaginations. I should put, if I call that realities as death traps, then I'm sure people would just pick this up tomorrow. Right, so all of the above require that we can observe the realities. If it's a personal or social reason, so it's for us or for other people in reality, that means we also want to be able to visit them. For the other two reasons, it's optional. You don't actually have to be able to visit them. If you want to observe a reality, it's got to make sense. So it's desirable that it's like our reality, if not essential. But to visit, it's got to be enough characteristics to permit immersion. Now, I mentioned this a bit earlier. You don't have to be a perfect overlap between the virtual world and the real world, but there has to be enough that you can take a lot of things for granted without having to work them out every single time. So it's some differences between the real world and the world that you've created, our reality and the reality that's been created. Some of them are irrelevant. Some of them are there because they're acceptable out of context, because of the context. So yeah, no toilet trips, great. Magic works, okay. Ghosts exist. Marzipan tastes nice. That's a terrible. Oh, I can't conceive of that. But it must intersect enough with reality that we can will ourselves to believe that what we know isn't reality, because we made it, is reality. And this is immersion. It's willing yourself to believe that you are in a reality which is not your own, even though you know it's not your own, but you're willing yourself to believe that it is. So, back to suffering. Whether we want suffering in our created realities depends on two things. How much do we want it to be like reality that we live in for reasons of immersion? So people go in and say, well, this is no good, I kick the cat and nothing happens, I want that cat to suffer. Well, you would add immersion because you wanted it to be for immersive reasons. You add suffering because you want it for immersive reasons. But also, how important is the feature for our reasons for creating reality? So maybe in this reality we did want fences to feel pain, and when people went along and hammered a firecracker in, the fence goes, ow, ow, no, stop it, no, don't light it, please. Because we could make that different. So maybe we do want to do this. Maybe we are wanting to, maybe our reason for creating the world is to see how people react when they have to treat every item as if it were a morally considerable being. So it's how much do we want to be in it, so it's like ourselves, and then what's our second motivation. Now, desiring our created reality to contain suffering doesn't mean it's ethical to implement it. The default position is that it's immoral to make morally considerable individuals suffer unless they agree to it. I'm sure you've been to those parties. Or to save them or to save someone else from something worse. Something worse, yes. So are we going to implement death? We don't have to. We can make our non-player characters live indefinitely. We can ignore aging. And we already know that this is unnecessary because it happens in today's MMOs. You kill a non-player character and it respawns. So why would we implement it? Well, it could be for their benefit. Because it sucks for individual NPCs. But on the whole, it's good for them. It would apply to MPs. Because on the whole, they would get to develop in ways that they wouldn't if all of them lived forever. If everybody lived forever, who's in charge of the world right now? Alexander the Great. This doesn't apply to our current non-sapient non-player characters, but if we had sapient ones, maybe we would want them killed. So we might be able to persuade ourselves that death's got more ups than downs. Would we allow non-player characters to kill one another? They've got free will, so some of them are going to be jerks. Some jerks will kill other non-player characters. Are we going to let them? Because we can stop them. We could make it, if you kill somebody else, it's you who dies, not them. Because murder is a bit rough on people who get murdered. Now, I mentioned free will back there. if our non-player characters are sapient, they must by definition have free will. If we were to remove their free will, or to tinker with it, they would no longer be sapient. So if we just remove their free will, well, they're no longer sapient, we pretty well killed the person who used to exist by taking away their free will. Does this also prevent us from editing their minds, to stop them from being a jerk? You're a jerk, I'm going to change your mind, and now created a new person out of the old person who is not a jerk. Oh, thanks. Or, aren't you a jerk? What if we wanted to imbue them with our morals? So when we made them, we just planted the seeds of our morals so they all grew up with our morals from the beginning, rather than editing them later. Is this really free will? And if it's not really free will, what have we done to these people? So the arguments for removing free will are therefore congruent, or at least very similar to those for implementing death, which leads to an interesting situation. One ethical reason for making people who are morally considerable suffer is to save them from something that's worse. If not having free will is equivalent to death, well, that would be worse. So you'd make people suffer because if you didn't, then they would lose their free will. So it could be that free will is necessary for, suffering is necessary for free will. There is a line of reasoning here, which I'm not going to go through, because if I did, it would take 5 minutes and then you'd shoot me down at the end. But there is a line of reasoning which would argue that you do need to have that. Right. So we know the realities, this is a different sort of change topic. We know that the realities that we are creating are consequent on realities. If reality gets switched off, so do all the realities that we've created. But the non-player characters we create don't know that they depend on reality unless we tell them. So do we tell them? Well, whether we do or not depends on why we created the reality. For some reasons, clearly we would want to tell them, because if we want to be worshipped by them, then we'd want to say, hi guys, look, I created you, hey. And then they can worship us, which they wouldn't do if they didn't know that we'd created them. But for other reasons, we wouldn't, because if we're simulating some aspect of reality, we don't want to interfere with that by adding, oh, by the way, guys, you may be suffering in a prisoner of war camp, but hey, we created you. Oh, thanks a heap. Now, because they're free thinking, they're going to speculate on their own existence regardless. So whether we tell them or not, because the mere fact that they're free thinking means they're going to think, where have we come from? They may well read into the design of their reality signs that it's got gods, which it does have because we created them, so we're their gods. So they're reading the reality saying, there are gods in this reality. Yeah, there are, us. However, they will be completely wrong about our nature. They won't know there was a team of 200 people doing it. They won't know there was 2 people doing it. They won't know it was computer generated by an AI program of the future, unless we tell them. And even if we do tell them, they might not believe us. Yeah, right. Should we correct their false beliefs? Again, it depends on why we created the reality. Now, the situation is complicated by the presence of players, people from our reality who are going to visit the realities that we've created. We've got no control over them. They could tell non-player characters anything, and we couldn't stop them. They could say, we are the gods, bow down and worship us, and I'll have a cake, please. All we get to do is to clear up their mess. And also, if we did send visitors from reality, that would expose the existence of our reality to their reality. So, if we do let players visit the reality, the non-player characters are going to see them, they're going to pick out the fact that these are otherworldly beings, then they're going to start asking awkward questions. Oh cool, can we visit this other reality, this higher reality? Do we get to go there when we die? Why do we die in the first place? What's the point of our existence? And you'd better have some answers for that. Yeah, we can give you control of a robot in our world, so yeah, you can come to our reality, you'll be walking around as a robot, and then we put you back in your reality. No, you die when you die, that's it. Records gone, zeros. You die in the first place so everyone else can develop. That's small comfort if you get murdered. And the point of your existence is to make us pots of money. Is the reality we create deterministic? Right. That means, is there uncertainty in it? If there's no uncertainty in it, that means every time you run it, you get the same reality. If there isn't, then our non-player characters have no free will. They just think they have free will, but they don't actually have any free will. Because we could reconstruct their reality as it is just by rebooting it from its starting conditions and running it for the same length of time. The entirety of a deterministic reality is embodied in its code, plus its starting setup. EVE Online generated its entire universe procedurally using 42 as the random number seed, which is always a nice number to be using. So if the world's going to be the same every time, then that means our non-player characters think they've got some free will, but they don't. Now, if it's got some actual randomness into it, uncertainty brought in by a random number generator, that means that they do have free will because we can't predict what's going to happen. But if we as gods can't predict what's going to happen, that means we're not omniscient. Because we can't just dump the reality state and figure out what's going to happen next, because it's not deterministic anymore. In a deterministic reality, we can. So NPC free will and God omniscience are incompatible. Well-known philosophical problem, but the thing is that there are other ways to get uncertainty. It doesn't have to come from a non-play, from a random number generator. It could come from players, because players go into a world. The world might be completely deterministic, but the players will do things which are non-deterministic and introduce variables which are not going to be introduced if we just let it to run for normal. So this means that gods can be omniscient with respect to the reality, and that its non-player characters can have free will. Thank me later, theologians. So if a reality's gods are omniscient, then its NPCs must derive their free will from the visitors coming from the god's reality. This is a bit about sub-realities, which I'll skip through because I've only got 4 minutes left. How do we treat the non-player characters in the realities we create a reality down here. These NPCs, they're clever, they create a reality down here, 2 levels down. How do we treat the ones 2 levels down? And the reason this is interesting is because we're above both of them. We can move them between. We could make somebody who is a non-player character in our world be a non-player character in the world they have created. We can make someone who's a player character in their world be a real person in the world they've created. It's like I could walk up and suddenly see one of my player characters, my non-player characters out of mud or out of Secret World or something. Ah, okay. We don't see that happening in reality, but we could do that. So we could ascend and descend people. Is that right? Is that wrong? Are we going to let them do it? Are we going to do it for fun? I mean, we don't have anything which even gets a handle on this using our existing ethical systems. So I do have a final point. This talk has concerned the responsibilities that we, as the gods of the realities that we create, have for the non-player characters of those realities, assuming they're sapient and everything else that we can make in the future. In reality, the world we live in, we are the non-player characters. You are a non-player character. Now, many people believe that there are one or more gods of reality. And everything that we can do to our non-player characters, any god of reality can do to us. So I raised a number of questions today about how to treat non-player characters. And you'll have been thinking, well, this is how I do it, this is how I wouldn't do it. Oh, that's a tricky one, I don't know how I'd do that. You'll have been pondering on that. That's those of you who are not on Facebook or reading your emails. Do your own morals match the ones that any, I say presume, because there might not be any god or gods of reality, seem to have exhibited? Is the way that you would behave to non-player characters the same or different to how it looks as though a God of our reality might have dealt with us? What does that say about you? What does it say about the presumed gods? Now, I said earlier that I'd get back to those of you who decided that sapient non-player characters are not morally considerable. You are a sapient non-player character, so by your own argument, you are not morally considerable. So none of us have to pay any attention to what you say because you're not morally considerable. So there you go, ethics from Essex, who knew?
Thanks, Richard, for a great and thought-provoking keynote. I don't expect we're going to get any questions. I think Dan was first.
So one thing that worries me a little about your talk is you're talking about suffering as if it has no benefits. I'm a math teacher. There are huge benefits to suffering. And since they don't know what they're getting into, I don't think I have their consent.
Yes, that's perhaps the case because you're suffering them because it's worse for them if they don't suffer. It's worse for them if they don't understand maths than if they do understand maths. And also, if you were trying to teach it to a donkey, that donkey would be suffering quite a bit and it would still not get to understand. I hope. Maybe they're secret mathematicians. But yes, you can have localized reasons, but the general concept of suffering, yeah.
Julian? Yeah, continuing on Dan's theme of suffering. I did suffer during math lessons.
Oh, I thought you were going to say during this talk.
So, how would we know what the NPCs suffer? Basically, looking at it from the point of philosophy of consciousness, the David Chalmers art problem, I am of the opinion that we can basically never know whether these NPCs will be sentient. There's no possible functional test that we could actually implement that will tell us this. And how would this affect the whole basis of this ethics you're laying out here if we don't know whether they are sentient or suffering?
Okay, well, first of all, we would know they're suffering because we implemented it. If there was,
Maybe they just looked at the suffering.
if we implemented it deliberately to make them suffer, then we would ourselves be treating it as if it were suffering, regardless of whether they thought it was or not. So if we actually implement suffering, yeah, okay, we may be deluding ourselves that these bits in the database are suffering, but actually, from our perspective, they are because that's what we put in for them.
If we would never ever know how to do that.
Yeah. But as for whether we know if they're ever sentient, well, I don't know, you are. All I know is that I am.
I am.
Yeah.
We're going to go over
Hi, so if Lee Sedol had killed himself after losing 4-1 to AlphaGo, that would have morally bankrupt DeepMind and would massively curtail research into superhuman board-playing agents. So your talk is predicated on this idea that sapient NPCs is inevitable, like a supernova. But it's not, because society gets in the way and changes the direction of technology. But do you not think that the first person who kills himself after their NPC suffers and dies, that will just curtail research?
I think it probably could put 1,000 years knock it back 1,000 years, but it's not going to knock it back 100 million.
I don't think it will. So people die playing StarCraft, but it doesn't stop people playing StarCraft. Literally, people have gone for 3 days without drinking and just died playing StarCraft.
But there's a difference between that and dying because of a broken heart over your NPC, which has been caused to suffer by a designer.
Yeah.
I'm just aware we've got several more questions, and then we're going to have to close the session.
Sorry.
So, kind of similar to what another person was saying is, what is your definition of sapiens?
Sapiens.
Yeah.
If something can explain to me that it's sapient, and I believe it, well, I'll give it a good.
So communication.
Yeah, however, if I've created something specifically to be my definition of sapient, it will be my definition of sapient.
Right.
So if I create what I think are sapient NPCs, then I have to treat them as what I think. Now, somebody else might say, well, no, they're not sapient. Of course they're not sapient. Well, you ask them to speak to dolphins and they won't. But they might be, if I've created them, then they are, from my perspective.
Okay, so potentially right now, the eggs that we have, we could consider them sapient and need to...
I don't really think the ones today, they can transfer symbols, but whether they understand the meaning of them. But at the moment, I don't think we need to worry about the AIs we're creating. But if we're creating ones which you put them in a robot, and the robot looks like us, and it walks around the planet, and it's indistinguishable Westworld-like, well, you've got to give it some credit for perhaps being morally considerable, if not.
And unfortunately, time is against us on this one. We've got time for maybe one or two more questions at the back.
I want to bring up religious arguments with you. This is a theocentric model of the world, but if we take out God and we see everything as an emergent property, like
Personally, personally, I'm an atheist. I mean, I don't believe there is a God. I think we're basically living Conway's game of life in 8 dimensions. But that doesn't mean that I'm right. And when we create a virtual world, the atheist non-player characters are wrong. Because there are gods. We've created them.
So we've got, I'm really sorry, we've got no more time for questions. However,